Joining us right now is Arnold Barnett, professor of statistics at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Professor, thank you for joining us right now. I mean, listen, I think the first question on a lot of the minds watching right now, a lot of the minds across the country who've been following this is how? How could this have happened? And obviously, we might be months away from getting an answer, but how does an investigation like this begin? And what exactly will they be looking for?
Well, the first thing they'll try to find out is what exactly happened. First what, then why. For example, what was the altitude at which the collision occurred? Close to Reagan Airport, the helicopters are supposed to be very close to the ground, and the planes on the normal glide path to the runway would be higher. So there would be vertical separation, but obviously there was none. And what was the altitude at which the crash occurred? And then we're getting contradictory information about what happened. I've read that possibly the transponder from the helicopter, which tells you something about where it is, may not have been functioning. And the pilots of the helicopter apparently volunteered to take care of their own separation from the air traffic rather than to depend on the controller. And why were they confident in this regard, et cetera? So there are so many questions that come up about, first of all, what happened, and why did it happen, and what should happen so that there's never a recurrence.
Can you talk about the recovery efforts that are underway right now? How much harder, how much more difficult does investigating this crash become since the crash scene is in the water as opposed to a crash that would have been on land?
I don't think it's that much more difficult now because, first of all, it's relatively shallow water, the Potomac there, approximately 9 feet deep. It's not like something in the ocean, where it could be miles below the surface. What's essential is getting access to the flight data recorders, the cockpit voice recorder, the one about the data. And I don't think there's worry that they won't be able to achieve that. Of course, the crash occurred above the water. The fact that water was below it rather than land wasn't really relevant to the tragedy itself. So I don't think the fact that there's water, it makes it difficult. Now the divers there, it's certainly unpleasant. But in terms of investigating why the crash occurred, the fact that it was over this shallow water is not necessarily a problem.
Professor, quickly here, while we still have another minute with you or so, to offer some perspective to our viewers right now, you've been nationally recognized as an expert in aviation safety and contributing to our safety when flying. For people who are watching who may see this crash and they may start experiencing a heightened anxiety about flying,
Sure.
What do you say to them?
Well, this is a tragedy, and I think we have to be careful not to say things that seem to make it sound, well, it's unusual, so never mind. However, look, last year, 900 million people boarded United States aircraft. The number who died in accidents was 0. The same thing year after year after year. Billions of passengers fly safely. Not only that, but these tragedies, paradoxically, actually make us safer. For example, in Korea, the plane crash about a month ago was much worse than it would have been otherwise because the plane crashed into a concrete barrier after it went beyond the runway. So now it's been announced that none of these concrete barriers will continue in Korea. They're taking them out. In the same way here, they're already talking about how there will no longer be military exercises in the vicinity of Reagan Airport. Yeah. So reforms in consequence of this tragedy mean we ourselves will be less likely to be at risk when we're flying into Reagan or anywhere else. So I think we should continue flying, although it's very painful today for everyone.
Arnold Barnett, professor of statistics at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you for having me.